Good afternoon, all my lovely people and children. Good Friday today, so I hope that you're all going into a really wonderful Easter weekend and you will not eat too much chocolate like I'm planning to do. And I'm telling you in advance now as well that I will not be reading the next chapter until Monday. Okay, so I'm taking Saturday and Sunday off. So there's only 3 more chapters to go. Can you believe it? So today I will be reading chapter 13, and then on Monday and Tuesday I will be reading the last 2 chapters of this book. Where will it go? Will the battle be won? Will there be a battle? Let's find out. Chapter 13. Yes, I saw Katla, but I don't know what happened next. I just sank into the black depths and I didn't wake up until the thunderstorm had passed and light was already beginning to appear behind the mountain peaks. I was lying with my head in Jonathan's lap and terror washed over me as soon as I remembered, because there, far away on the other side of the river, was where Katla had stood on a cliff, high up above Kama Falls. I whimpered when I recalled it, and Jonathan tried to comfort me. She isn't there any longer, he said. She's gone now. But I still cried, and I asked him, how can things like Katla exist? Is it a monster or what? She is a monster, said Jonathan. She is a female dragon, risen from ancient times. That's what she is, and she is cruel as Tangle himself. Where did he get her from? I asked. She came out of Katla Cavern. That's what people think, said Jonathan. She fell asleep down there one night in ancient times and then slept for thousands upon thousands of years, and no one knew she existed. But one morning she woke up. One terrible morning, she came crawling into Tangle's castle, spurting death-dealing fire at each and every one, and they fell in all directions in her path. Why didn't she kill Tangle? I said. Well, Tangle fled for his life through the great rooms of his castle. As she approached him, he tore down a great battle horn used to calling up soldiers to help. And when he blew the horn... What happened then? I asked. Well, when he blew the horn, then Katla came crawling to him like a dog. Ever since that day, she has obeyed Tangle and Tangle alone. She's afraid of his battle horn. When he blows it, she obeys him blindly. It was getting lighter and lighter. The mountain peaks over in Kamanyaka were glowing like Katla's fire, and we were going to Kamanyaka now. How frightened I was. Oh, how terribly afraid. Who knew where Katla was lying in wait? Where was she? Where did she live? Did she live in Katla Cavern? And how could Orva then be there? I asked Jonathan, and he told me how things were. Katla didn't live in Katla Cavern. Hold on a second. He told me how things were. Katla didn't live in Katla Cavern. She had never gone back there after her ancient sleep. No, Tangle kept her tethered in a cave near Kama Falls. In that cave, she was chained with a chain of gold, Jonathan said, and there she had to stay, except when Tangle took her with him to instill terror into the people he wished to terrorize. I saw her in Wild Rose Valley once, said Jonathan. And did you cry out? I said. Yes, I cried out, he said. The terror grew in me. I'm so afraid, Jonathan. I'm so afraid Katla will kill us. He tried to calm me again. But she's tethered. She can move no further than the length of her chain, no further than that cliff where you saw her. She stands there nearly all the time and she stares down into Kama Falls. Why does she do that? I said. I don't know, said Jonathan. Perhaps she's looking for calm. Who is calm? I said. Oh, that's just Elfrida's talk, said Jonathan. No one has ever seen Carm. He doesn't exist. But Elfrida says that once in ancient times he lived in Kama Falls and that Katla hated him then and she cannot forget it. That's why she stands there staring. Who was he? Who could live in such a terrible waterfall? I said. Well, he was a monster too, said Jonathan. A sea serpent, as long as the river is wide, Elfrida says. But that's probably only one of those olden day sagas. Perhaps he's no more of a saga than Katla, I said. He didn't reply to that, but said, do you know what Elfrida told me while you were there in the forest picking wild strawberries? She said that when she was small, she used to frighten children with Kam and Katla. The saga of the dragon in Katla Heaven and the sea serpent in Kama Falls. She'd heard it many a time in her childhood, and she liked it very much, just because it was so scary. It was one of those ancient sagas that people have frightened children with in all times, and Elfrida said, couldn't Katla have stayed in her cavern then, I said, and gone on being a saga? Well, that's just what Elfrida thought too, said Jonathan. I shivered and I wondered if Carmanyaca was a country full of monsters. I didn't want to go there, but now I had to. We fortified ourselves from the haversack first, saving some food for Orva, because Jonathan said that only starvation reigned in Katla Heaven. Grim and Fjallar drank the rainwater that had collected in the crevices. There was no good grazing for them up here in the mountains, but a little grass was growing by the bridge, so I think they had had just about enough when we set off. We rode across the bridge towards Carmanyaca, the country of Tango and the country of monsters. I was so frightened that I was shaking all over. That sea serpent, perhaps I didn't seriously believe that he existed, but all the same, supposing he suddenly flung himself up out of the depths and pulled us down off the bridge to perish in Kama Falls. And then Katla. I dreaded her more than anything. Perhaps she was waiting for us now, over there on Tangle's shore, with her cruel fangs and her death-dealing fire. Oh, you cannot believe how frightened I was. But we crossed the bridge, and I saw no Katla. She wasn't on her cliff, and I said to Jonathan, no, she isn't there. And yet she was there, not on the cliff, but her terrible head was protruding from behind a huge block of rock by the path up towards Tangle's castle. We saw her there, and she saw us, and she let out a scream that would demolish mountains. Jets of fire and smoke were pouring out of her nostrils as she snorted with rage and jerked at her chain, jerking and screaming over and over again. Grim and Fjallar were so beside themselves with terror that we could hardly hold on to them. And my terror was no less. I begged of Jonathan that we could go back to Nangiala, but he said, we can't let Orva down. Don't be afraid. Katla can't reach us, however much she drags and pulls at her chain. And yet we had to hurry, he said, because Katla's screams were a signal that could be heard as far up as Tangle's castle. And soon we would have a swarm of Tangle's soldiers on us if we didn't flee and hide in the mountains. We rode along a wretched, narrow, steep mountain path, riding so that sparks flew from us, riding hither and thither amongst the rocks to lead any pursuers astray. Every moment I was expecting to hear galloping horses behind us and shouts from Tangle's soldiers trying to get us with their spears and arrows and swords, but none came. It was probably difficult to follow anyone amongst Carmanyaca's many cliffs and mountains, where it was easy for the hunted to evade their pursuers. When we had ridden for a long time, I asked Jonathan, where are we going? To Katla Cavern, of course, he said. We're almost there now. That's Katla Mountain, straight in front of your nose. And yes, it was. In front of us was a low, flat mountain with steep slopes dropping straight down if we wanted to, which we did, because we had to get right across the mountain, Jonathan said. The entrance lies on the other side, towards the river, he said, and I must see what happens there. Jonathan, do you really think we can ever get into Cutlass Cavern? I said. He had told me about the huge copper gateway across the entrance to the cave, and about the tanglemen who day and night stood on guard outside. How on earth were we going to get in? He didn't answer me, only said that we would have to hide the horses now, as they couldn't climb mountains. We let them into a sheltered crevice immediately below Cutler Mountain and left them there, horses, packs, and everything. Jonathan patted Grim and said, "Wait there, we're only going on a scouting trip." I didn't like the idea because I didn't want to be separated from Fjallar, but that couldn't be helped. It took us quite a time to get up on the mountain plateau, and I was tired when we eventually reached it. Jonathan said we could rest for a while, so I at once threw myself full length down on the ground, and Jonathan did so too, and we lay there up on Cutler Mountain, the wide sky above us, and Cutler Cavern directly beneath us. It was very strange to think about. Inside the mountain, somewhere beneath us, was that terrible, terrible cavern with all its passages and caves where so many people had languished and died. And out here, butterflies were fluttering about in the sunlight. The sky above us was blue with small white clouds, and flowers and grass were growing all around us. It was strange that flowers and grass grew on the roof of Cutler Cavern. I wondered if so many people had died in Cutler Cavern, whether perhaps Orva was also dead. And I asked Jonathan whether he thought so too, but he didn't reply. He just lay there staring straight up at the sky, thinking about something I could see. And finally he said, "If it's true that Cutler slept her ancient sleep in Cutler Cavern, then how did she get out when she woke? The copper gateway was already there then, because Tangle has always used Cutler Cavern as his prison." "While Cutler was sleeping inside?" I said. "Yes, while Cutler was sleeping inside," said Jonathan, "without anyone knowing about it." Oh, I shivered. I couldn't imagine anything worse. Think of sitting imprisoned in Cutler Cavern and seeing a dragon come crawling along just like that. But Jonathan had other thoughts in his head. "She must have come out another way," he said, "and I must find that way, even if it takes me a year." We couldn't stay any longer as Jonathan was so restless. We were heading for Cutler Cavern, which was only a short walk across the mountain. We could already see the river far below us and Nangiyala on the other side. Oh, how I longed to be there. "Look, Jonathan," I said, "I can see the willow where we bathed, there, on the other side of the river." But Jonathan made a sign for me to be quiet. He was afraid someone might hear us now we were so close. This was where Cutler Mountain ended in a perpendicular cliff, and in the mountainside below us was the copper gateway into Cutler Cavern, Jonathan said, although we couldn't see it from up there. But we could see the soldiers on guard, 3 tanglemen. I only had to see their black helmets for my heart to begin thumping. We had wriggled on our stomachs right to the edge of the precipice to be able to look down at them. And if only they had looked up, they would have seen us. But they could not have been more useless guards, because they did not look in any direction. They just sat there playing dice, not bothering about anything else. Though no enemy could penetrate beyond the copper gate, so why would they keep watch? Just then we saw the gate swing open down there, and someone came out of the cave, another tangleman. He was carrying an empty food bowl, which he flung to the ground. The gate fell back behind him, and we could hear him locking it. "Well, now that pig has been fed for the last time," he said. The others laughed at one of them, and one of them said, "Did you tell him what a remarkable day it is today, the last day of his life? I suppose you told him that Cutler is expecting him this evening when darkness falls?" "Ha, yes, and do you know what he said?" "Oh, yes, at last," he said. And then he asked to be allowed to send a message to Wildrose Valley. How did it go now? "Orva may die, but freedom never." course, said the other man. You can tell that to Katla this evening and hear what she has to say. I looked at Jonathan, who had turned pale. Come on, he said. We must get away from here right now. We crept away from the precipice as quickly and quietly as we could, and we knew we were out of sight, and then we ran all the way back. We ran without stopping until we got back to Grimmenfjalla. We sat in the crevice with the horses because now we didn't know what to do. Jonathan was so sad, and I could do nothing to comfort him, only be sad too. I realized how much he was grieving for Orvar. He thought he would be able to help him, and now he no longer believed it. Orvar, my friend, whom I never met, he said, tonight you will die, and what will then happen to Nangiala's green valleys? We ate a little bread, which we shared with Grimmenfjalla. I would have liked a gulp or two of goat's milk too, because we had saved some. Not yet, Rusky, said Jonathan. Tonight, when darkness has fallen, then I will give you every drop, but not before. For a long while he sat there quiet, still, and dispirited. But in the end he said, it'll be like looking for a needle in a haystack, I know, but we must try all the same. Try what? I said. To find out where Katla got out, he said, though I could see he didn't really believe in it himself. If we had a year, he said, then we might, but we've got only a day. Just as he was saying it, something happened. In the narrow crevice where we were sitting, a few bushes were growing at the far end by the mountain wall, and out of those bushes a terrified fox suddenly appeared, slunk past us, and was gone almost before we had time to see him. Where on earth did that fox come from? Said Jonathan. I must find out. He vanished behind the bushes, and I stayed where I was waiting. But he was so long and so quiet, I grew uneasy in the end. Where are you, Jonathan? I cried. And then suddenly I got an answer. It sounded quite wild. Do you know where that fox came from? From inside the mountain. Do you see, Rusky? From inside Katla Mountain. There's a big cave in here. Perhaps everything had already been decided in the ancient days of sagas. Perhaps Jonathan had been named as Orvar's savior even then for the sake of Wild Rose Valley. And perhaps there was some secret saga beings who guided our footsteps without us knowing it, because how could Jonathan otherwise have found a way into Katla Cavern precisely where we had happened to put our horses? It was just as strange as when amongst all those houses in Wild Rose Valley I happened to find Matthias's and none other. Katla's exit from Katla Cavern, it must be that which Jonathan had found. We could not believe it otherwise. It was a passage straight into the mountainside, not at all large, but large enough for a starving female dragon to make her way along, said Jonathan, if she had woken up after thousands of years and found her usual path close by Copper Gateway. And large enough for us. I stared into the dark hall. How many sleeping dragons would be in there? Who would wake if he went in and happened to step on them? That was what I wondered. And then I felt Jonathan's arm around my shoulders. Rusky, he said, I don't know what's waiting in there in the dark, but I'm going in there now. So am I said, my voice trembling a little bit. Jonathan stroked my cheek with his forefinger, as he used to do sometimes. Are you sure you wouldn't prefer to wait here with the horses? Haven't I told you that wherever you go, I go too? I said. Yes, you did tell me that, said Jonathan, and he sounded quite glad. Because I want to be with you, I said, even if it's in an underground kingdom of the depths. Katla Cavern was an underground kingdom of the depths. Creeping along that black hole was like creeping through an evil black dream which you cannot wake up from, like going from sunlight into eternal night. Here they are at the entrance. The whole of Katla Cavern was nothing but a dead old dragon's nest, I thought, reeking of wickedness from ancient times. No doubt, thousands of dragon eggs had been hatched out there, and cruel dragons had crawled out in hosts to kill everything in their way. An old dragon's nest was just the kind of place Tangle would think of as a suitable place for a prison. I shivered when I thought of everything he had done to people in there. The air seemed to be so thick with old dried wickedness, whisperings from far away inside the cave, which seemed to be about all the torment and tears and death which Cutler Kevin had experienced during Tangle's reign. I wanted to ask Jonathan if he could hear the whisperings too, but I didn't, as I was probably imagining them. Now, Rusky, we're going on a walk that you'll never forget, said Jonathan. It was true. We had to get right through the mountain to reach the prison cave where Orva was just inside the copper gateway. It was that cave that people meant when they spoke of Cutler Kevin, Jonathan said, because they didn't know of any other cave. We didn't even really know whether it would be possible to reach underground, but we knew the way there was going to be a long one as we walked that stretch before up on the mountain. And it would be 7 times worse making our way down there through dark, rambling passages with only the light from the torches we had with us. Oh, it was terrible to see the torchlight flickering over the cave walls, only lighting up a little of the great darkness around us, and so everything outside the light seemed even more dangerous. Who knows, I thought. Perhaps there were dragons and serpents and monsters galore lying in wait for us in their dark caves. I was so frightened that we would lose our way in the passages, but Jonathan made black soot marks with his torch as we went on so that we could find our way back. Walk, Jonathan had said, but we didn't do much walking. We crept, we crawled, we climbed, we even swam and jumped and clambered and struggled and toiled and fell. That's what we did. What a walk. And what caves. Sometimes we came to huge caverns, so vast that we could see no end to them, except for the echo, which told us what huge rooms they were. Sometimes we had to go through places where you couldn't even stand up, but we had to crawl on your stomach like any other dragon. Sometimes the way was barred by underground streams, which we had to swim. And worst of all, sometimes great gaping chasms appeared at our feet. I nearly fell into one of these. I was carrying the torch and I tripped, dropping the torch, and we saw it falling like a stream of fire, further and further and further down until at last it disappeared and we were left in the dark. The worst and darkest darkness in the world. I dared not move or talk or even think. I tried to forget that I existed, standing there in the black darkness on the edge of a chasm. But I heard Jonathan's voice right beside me. He lit the other torch we had with us, meanwhile talking to me, talking and talking quite calmly, so that I shouldn't go mad with terror, I suppose. So we kept on going. How long for, I don't know, because in the depths of Cutler Cavern there was no time. It seemed as if we had been wandering round for an eternity, and I began to fear that we wouldn't get there until it was too late. Perhaps it was too late already. Perhaps darkness had already fallen out there, and perhaps he was already with Cutler. I asked Jonathan if he thought so too. I don't know, he said, but don't think about it now if you don't want to go mad. We had come to a narrow, twisting path which never seemed to come to an end, but simply grew narrower and more confined, bit by bit, shrinking in height and width until we could hardly go on and finally became just a little hole through which you had to crawl. But on the other side of the hole, we were suddenly in a large cavern. How large we couldn't tell, as the light from the torch did not reach very far. But Jonathan tested the echo. Ho, 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 he called, and we heard the echo replying ho, 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 many times in many different directions. But then we heard something else too. Another voice far away in the dark. Ho, 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 it mocked. What do you want, you who come in such strange ways with torches and light? I'm looking for Orva, said Jonathan. Orva is here, said the voice. And who are you? I'm Jonathan Lionheart, said Jonathan, and with me is my brother, Carl Lionheart. We've come to save you, Orva. Too late, said the voice. Too late, but thanks all the same. Hardly the words had been uttered when we heard the copper gate opening with a screech. Jonathan threw down his torch, stamped on it so that it went out, and then we stood still and waited. In through the gateway came a tangleman with a lantern in his hand. I began to cry silently to myself, not because I was afraid, but for Orva's sake. How could things be so cruel that they were coming to take him at this very moment? Orva from Wildrose Valley, prepare yourself, said the tangleman. In a moment, you'll be taken to Katla. The black escorts are on their way. In the light of the lantern, we could see a large wooden cage made of rough timbers, and we realized that inside that cage, Orva was imprisoned like an animal. The tangleman put the lantern down on the ground by his cage. You may have a lantern for your last hour. In his mercy, Tangle has decided that, so that you will get used to the light again and be able to see Katla when you meet her, which I'm sure you want to. He cackled, ha ha ha, with laughter, and then vanished through the gate, which fell back behind him with a crash. By then, we were already up to the cage and Orva, and we could see him in the light of the lantern, a wretched sight, as he could barely move. But he crawled up to the bars and stretched out his hands towards us through the timbers. Jonathan Lionheart, he said, I've heard a lot about you at home in Wildrose Valley, and now you've come here. Yes, now I've come here, said Jonathan. And then I heard that he too was crying a little because of Orva and his wretchedness. But then he whipped out the knife he kept in his belt and he began hacking at the cage. Come on, Rusky, help, now, he said. And I hacked with my knife too. Though what could we do with two knives? What we needed was an axe and a saw. But we hacked away with our knives until our hands were bleeding. We hacked and we cried because we knew we had come too late, and Orva knew it too. But perhaps he wished to believe that it wasn't true because he was panting with excitement inside his cage, mumbling now and again, hurry, hurry. We hurried so that the blood ran. We hacked away wildly, every moment expecting the gate to open and black escorts to come in. And then the end would have come for Orva and for us and for the whole of Wildrose Valley. They won't be fetching only one, I thought. Katla will have 3 tonight. I felt that I couldn't endure much more. My hands were shaking so that I could hardly hold my knife. Jonathan was shouting with rage against those stupid timbers that would not give away, however much we hacked them. He kicked them, shouted, he kicked and hacked again and kicked again. And then, at last there was a crash. Yes, at last one timber gave way, and then another. It was enough. Now, Orva, now, said Jonathan. But there was nothing but a gasp in reply. So Jonathan crawled into the cage and pulled out Orva, who could neither stand nor walk. Neither could I by then, but I reeled ahead of them with the lantern, and Jonathan began to drag Orva away towards our rescue hall. He was tired now and panting too. Yes, we were panting like little hunted animals, all 3 of us, which was exactly what we felt like too, at least I did. However he managed it, Jonathan succeeded in dragging Orva right across the cabin, squeezing into the hole, and in some amazing way getting Orva with him, now more dead than alive. As I was then too, now it was my turn to creep through the hole. But I didn't get that far, because then we heard the screech of the gate, and it was as if all the energy ran out of me and I couldn't move at all. Quick, quick, the lantern, gasped Jonathan, and I handed it to him, although my hands were shaking. The lantern had to be hidden, as the slightest glimmer would betray us. The black escorts, they were already in the cavern, and more tanglemen with lanterns in their hands. It grew terrifyingly light, but over in our corner it was dark, and Jonathan bent down and grabbed my arms and pulled me through the hole into the dark passage behind. And there we lay, all three of us, panting, listening to their cries. He's gone! He's gone! Phew, what a chapter this was. Chapter 14 tomorrow, and we're going to find out whether they're going to make it, whether they'll make their escape all the way until the end, or are Tanglemen going to find them again? I don't know. 2 more chapters to go, not tomorrow actually. So tomorrow and Sunday, I will not be reading at 5 o'clock. I'll start again on Monday, and then Tuesday, and then Wednesday, school starts. Can you believe it? So school starts not at school, but Miss Shin and I have organized new learning for you. Loads of interesting, fun things to do. And your mums and dads are going to help you with that as much as they can. And hopefully you'll be doing loads of things all by yourselves. And of course, Miss Shin and I will definitely be there to answer any emails that you might have, or even any phone calls that you might want to go and have. And yeah, we're looking forward to the start of term 2. Let's hope that this lockdown is quickly finished so that we can all see each other again at school. But for now, the last 2 chapters, you'll have to wait until Monday. Dun, dun, dun. Bye. See you then. No, actually, not see you then. I always say see you then, but I don't. Bye.